The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was followed by the slide of his leather duffel bag across our marble floor. He didn't look at me. He was focused on the task, his movements precise, efficient, like he was closing a file on a case that was already won. I stood by the kitchen island, my hands flat against the cold stone. "Alex, please," I whispered. The words felt foreign in my own mouth, weak. "Just talk to me." He finally looked up. His eyes, the same ones that used to find mine across a crowded room, were flat, unreadable. "There's nothing left to say, Morgan." He straightened his tie, a silk one I'd bought him for our 3rd anniversary. It was a deep charcoal gray, the color of a stormy sky. "I've arranged for my things to be moved tomorrow. I'll stay at the club until then." The club, of course, a place I wasn't welcome. A place where business was done over whiskey and handshakes, where wives were a topic, not attendees. "Just like that," my voice cracked. "After 12 years, it's just an arrangement." He picked up the bag, the strap groaning under the weight of his meticulously folded life. He walked to the door, his expensive shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. Another thing he'd chosen. Another piece of a life I thought was ours. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "I'm doing you a favor, you know." I just stared, confused. A favor? This tearing, this amputation, was a favor? He turned his head slightly, and a sliver of a smirk touched his lips. It was cruel. It was the face of a stranger. "You've gotten comfortable. Complacent. You ride my coattails at the firm, you live in the house my salary pays for. You've forgotten what it's like to actually fight for something." My breath caught in my throat. Every late night, every missed dinner, every weekend I'd spent poring over briefs and precedents while he was out networking. It all vanished in his casual dismissal. "That's not true," I said, the words barely audible. "Isn't it?" He finally faced me fully, and the coldness in his gaze was absolute. "Let's be honest, Morgan. You're a decent lawyer, a good associate, but you don't have what it takes. Not for partner. Not for this life." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a confidential, condescending murmur. It was the voice he used on junior associates right before tearing their work to shreds. "You'd still be chasing ambulances in some strip mall firm if it weren't for me. I gave you this." He gestured around the grand foyer, at the life he was now packing into a single bag. The injustice of it felt like a physical blow. I had been top of my class. I had made law review on my own merit. We met at a university event equals, or so I had thought. "You'll never make it without me," he said, the words clear and final, each one a perfectly sharpened stone. "You'll be drowning in 6 months. I give you a year, tops, before you're begging me for a lifeline." He smiled then, a real smile, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It was the smile of a man who had just set a building on fire and was walking away to watch it burn from a safe distance. Then he opened the door, and the city lights bled into our hallway. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut, and the deadbolt turned from the other side, locking me in or him out. I wasn't sure which. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence he left behind. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. The air was thick with the ghost of his cologne and the echo of his final words. "You'll never make it without me." I sank to the floor, my back against the cold kitchen cabinets, and for the first time in 12 years, I was completely and utterly alone. I didn't realize how deeply I had believed him, not until the quiet began to seep into my bones. The next morning, the movers came. They were quiet, respectful, and terribly efficient. They moved with a silent choreography, taking his suits, his books, his oversized leather armchair. They even took the coffee machine he insisted was the only one that made a decent espresso. I sat on the stairs, wrapped in a blanket, watching them dismantle our life. Each item they carried out felt like a piece of me being removed. When they were gone, the house echoed with emptiness. The indentations on the carpet where his chair used to be looked like scars. I walked into his study. His desk was clear, save for one small thing: a potted succulent. I'd given it to him when he made junior partner, a silly little gift. "It thrives on neglect," I joked. He'd placed it on his windowsill and promptly forgotten about it. I was the one who watered it, who turned it towards the sun. Its leaves were looking a little withered, a little pale. I touched one. It was soft and cool. I picked it up and carried it to the kitchen, placing it on the windowsill above the sink. A tiny, forgotten green thing in a vast, empty house. The first week was a blur of hollow gestures. I'd wake up and reach for him. I'd make enough coffee for two. I'd listen for the sound of his key in the door around 7 p.m. each time. The reality would hit me again. A fresh wave of grief, a sharp physical ache in my chest. Work was worse. The firm we'd built our careers in, the place that had once felt like a second home, became a minefield. Alex and I were in different departments, thank God, but the building wasn't that big. I saw the looks in the elevator, the pitying smiles from the receptionists, the way conversations would stop when I walked into the break room. Alex, of course, was handling it with his usual seamless charm. He was the wronged party, the dignified man forced to make a difficult choice. I heard the whispers. Morgan had become difficult. She was too emotional. She'd lost her focus. He was controlling the narrative, painting me as unstable, incompetent. He was proving his own prophecy. I tried to talk to Sarah, a senior associate I'd considered a friend. We'd come up together, celebrating each other's wins. I caught her by the coffee station, my heart pounding. "Sarah, can we talk?" She gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile. "Oh, Morgan, I'm so slammed right now. Major deadline, you know how it is." She didn't meet my eye. She just filled her mug and scurried away, leaving me standing there feeling foolish and exposed. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It felt like every door was closing, every friendly face turning away. He hadn't just left me, he was methodically cutting every thread that connected me to the world we had shared. 2 weeks after he left, I saw a picture on social media. It was a group photo from a weekend getaway at a lake house. Our friends, the people who'd been at our wedding, who we'd hosted for countless dinners. And there, in the middle of them all, was Alex. He had his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, blonde, and laughing. Everyone was laughing. They all looked so happy. I scrolled back. There were more pictures. Dinners, parties, weekend trips. A whole life I was no longer a part of, a life that had seamlessly reformed without me, as if I had never been there at all. I closed my laptop and felt a chilling emptiness. These people had been my support system, my chosen family, and in the space of 2 weeks they had chosen him. Or rather, he had made it impossible for them to choose me. The loneliness was a physical presence in the house. It sat beside me on the couch, lay next to me in the cavernous bed. It was the silence on my phone, the absence of emails from anyone but work. I started to question everything. Had our friends ever really been my friends? Had my success at the firm truly been my own? Alex's words played on a loop in my head. "You'll never make it without me. You ride my coattails, I gave you this." Maybe he was right. I started going through my old case files, my performance reviews. I was searching for proof that I was good at my job, that I deserved to be there. But all I could see were his fingerprints. A case he'd helped me strategize on, an introduction he'd made, a partner he'd put in a good word with. Had any of it been me, or was I just a reflection of him? The doubt was like a slow-acting poison, paralyzing me. I'd sit at my desk, staring at a brief, and the words would blur. My confidence, once a solid foundation, had crumbled into dust. I found myself avoiding people, eating lunch at my desk, leaving the office the second the clock hit 5. I just wanted to go home, to the quiet, empty house that felt more like a tomb every day. One evening, I was listlessly making toast for dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our joint bank account. A large withdrawal, very large. My hands started to shake as I logged in. He'd emptied it. Everything. All of our shared savings, the money we'd put away for a down payment on a bigger house, for a future I still believed in just a month ago. It was all gone. The toast popped up, burnt. The smell filled the kitchen. I sank into a chair, the account statement glowing on my phone screen. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a demolition. He wasn't just leaving me. He was gutting me, ensuring I had nothing left to stand on. The cruelty was so profound, so absolute, it was almost hard to comprehend. This was the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with. How could he do this? A memory surfaced, unbidden. Us, years ago, sitting in our tiny first apartment. We were studying for the bar exam, surrounded by textbooks and flashcards. We were exhausted, broke, but so full of hope. He'd taken my hand. "It's you and me against the world, Morgan," he'd said. "We're going to be a power couple. We're going to build an empire together." I'd believed him. I'd believed in us. The memory was so painful it felt like a fresh wound. I felt the hot sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. Crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. It felt like something he would expect. Instead, I stood up and walked to the sink. The little succulent sat on the windowsill, catching the last of the evening light. Its leaves looked a little plumper, a little greener. It was still small, still fragile, but it was surviving. I reached out and gently touched a leaf. It was resilient. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the numbers from the bank account burned into my vision. The humiliation at work, the loss of my friends, the theft of my financial security, it was a systematic dismantling of my entire life. He hadn't just left, he had declared war. A cold, hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something else, something colder. I thought about his smirk as he'd walked out the door. The casual confidence in his voice when he'd told me I would fail. He wasn't just predicting it. He was engineering it. He was making sure of it. Why? Was his ego so fragile that he couldn't bear the thought of me succeeding without him? Did he need to see me broken to feel powerful? The questions churned in my mind, but the answers didn't matter. All that mattered was the reality of my situation. I was alone, undermined, and nearly broke. He expected me to crumble. He expected me to call him, crying, begging, just like he'd said. The next day at work was the worst yet. I was called into a meeting with Mr. Henderson, one of the firm's senior partners. He was an old-school lawyer, a friend of Alex's father, and a man whose approval Alex had always craved. I walked into his cavernous office, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The room smelled of old leather and furniture polish. He didn't ask me to sit down. He stood by his window, looking down at the city below. "Morgan," he said, his voice laced with a sort of weary disappointment. "I've been hearing some things." I stood silently, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Alex has told me about the situation," he continued, finally turning to face me. His eyes were paternalistic, patronizing. "He's very concerned about you." Concerned? The word was so absurd I almost laughed. "He feels your focus hasn't been where it needs to be lately, that this separation is hitting you hard. Your work is suffering." My mind raced. My work wasn't suffering. I was meeting every deadline, my billable hours were consistent. I was exhausted and heartbroken, but I was not letting my work slide. It was the only thing I had left. "With all due respect, sir," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "My work has not been affected." He held up a hand, silencing me. "Let's not be difficult, Morgan. We're all family here. I think it might be best if you took some time off, a leave of absence, to get your personal life in order." There it was, the final nail. He wasn't just trying to sabotage me with whispers. He was using his influence to have me removed, pushed out of the career I had worked so hard for. The walls of the office seemed to close in. I could feel Alex's victory, could almost hear his smug laughter. He had won. He had boxed me in, isolated me, and was now having me gracefully ejected from the ring. I looked at Mr. Henderson, at his impassive, judgmental face, and I saw the entire system laid bare. The boys' club. The network of favors and loyalties that I would never be a part of. I was an outsider, a temporary guest in their world, and my invitation had just been revoked. "I understand," I said. The words tasted like ash. I walked out of his office in a daze. I didn't go back to my desk. I took the elevator down to the lobby, my reflection in the polished brass doors a pale, haunted stranger. I walked out onto the street, the city noise a dull roar in my ears. I just kept walking, block after block, with no destination in mind. He had taken my friends, my money, and now my job, my identity. He had left me with nothing. He had proven his point. I ended up at a small park, a little patch of green squeezed between towering glass buildings. I sat on a bench, watching the city rush by, a stream of anonymous faces. I felt invisible, erased. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. The lights of the city started to flicker on, one by one. Office windows filled with people still working, still fighting, still belonging. I thought about the woman in the photograph with Alex. I thought about Mr. Henderson's dismissive tone. I thought about the empty bank account. And I thought about his final words. "You'll never make it without me." It was a threat, a curse, a prophecy he was determined to fulfill. He wanted me to disappear. To become a sad story he could tell at cocktail parties, the cautionary tale of the emotional ex-wife who just couldn't cope. I sat there on that park bench for hours, until the sky was black and the air was cold. I felt the full weight of my isolation, the crushing despair of my situation. It felt like drowning. But then, underneath the despair, a tiny, unfamiliar feeling sparked. It wasn't hope. It was something harder, sharper. It was anger. A deep, quiet, clarifying anger. He had miscalculated. He thought my kindness was weakness. He thought my love was dependence. He had stripped away everything he thought made me who I was, but he had left the foundation. He had left me. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone, my face pale and tired in the city glow. I barely recognized the woman staring back. That's when I realized he hadn't just left me, he was trying to erase me. That realization didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a diagnosis. The anger wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and dense, a solid weight in my gut. It gave me something to stand on. I got up from the bench, my legs stiff. The city was a blur of headlights and hurried footsteps, but for the first time since he'd left, I didn't feel lost in it. I felt separate. I walked home. The key in the lock felt different in my hand. It wasn't the key to our asterisk home anymore. It was the key to a crime scene. The first thing I did was walk to the kitchen. The little succulent sat on the windowsill, its silhouette dark against the city glow. I filled a glass with water and very carefully, very deliberately, gave it a drink. I watched the dry soil darken as it absorbed the moisture. A small, simple act of care. It was a promise. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I took a blanket and curled up on the sofa. I didn't want to lie in the space he had occupied, didn't want to be haunted by the ghost of his presence. The next morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck but a clarity in my mind. He wanted to erase me. Fine, let him try. But you can't erase someone who refuses to disappear. My first call wasn't to a friend. It wasn't to my parents, whom I didn't want to worry. It was to a lawyer, not someone from our circle, not someone who knew Alex or his father or Mr. Henderson. I spent hours online, researching boutique firms, looking for a name that felt right. I found one, Anya Sharma. Her bio was short and direct. She specialized in complex, high-asset divorces, particularly for professional women. Her photo showed a woman with intelligent eyes and no hint of a smile. I called her office and got an appointment for the next day. Walking into her small, modern office felt like crossing a threshold. It wasn't opulent like my old firm. It was functional, clean, and commanded a quiet authority. Anya Sharma was exactly as she appeared in her photo. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her hands steepled on her desk. I told her everything. The emotional betrayal, the social isolation, the whispers at work, the leave of absence, the drained bank account. I laid it all out, the ugly, humiliating truth. I expected pity, or worse, skepticism. When I finished, silence hung between us. She leaned forward slightly. "He didn't just break a promise, Morgan," she said, her voice calm and even. "He committed financial misconduct. Draining a joint marital account without consent, with the clear intent to deprive you of access to shared funds, is a significant legal misstep." She paused. "He's arrogant. He assumed you'd be too broken to fight back effectively." Hearing it framed that way, not as a personal failure, but as a legal vulnerability on his part, was like a switch being flipped in my brain. "He told me I'd never make it without him," I whispered, the words still tasting of shame. Anya's expression didn't soften, but her eyes held a flicker of understanding. "Good. Let him believe that. The most dangerous opponent is the one your enemy underestimates." We spent the next 2 hours outlining a strategy. It was methodical, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. We filed an emergency motion to freeze his personal assets and demand a full accounting of the marital funds. We started the official discovery process. I walked out of her office feeling lighter. The heavy blanket of despair had been lifted, replaced by a clear, albeit difficult, path forward. The next step was the house. It was half his legally, but it was all his emotionally. His taste, his choices, his monument to his own success. Every room was a memory, every corner a ghost. Living there was like living in a museum dedicated to my own failure. I called a real estate agent that afternoon. Putting the house on the market was both heartbreaking and liberating. I had to pack up 12 years of a shared life. I went through closets filled with his clothes, shelves lined with his books. I found old photos, ticket stubs from our first date, a dried rose from our first anniversary. For a moment, the grief washed over me again, a tidal wave of what-ifs and why-nots. I sat on the floor of our walk-in closet, holding a faded photograph of us on our honeymoon, and I let myself cry. I cried for the woman I had been, the woman who believed in forevers. Then I wiped my tears, put the photo in a box labeled donations, and kept packing. I was ruthless. Anything that was his or that reminded me of him went into a box for storage to be dealt with by the lawyers. Anything that felt tainted by our life together, I gave away. I was shedding a skin. I found a small apartment to rent in a different part of the city. It was a third of the size of the house, with a tiny kitchen and a bedroom that looked out onto a brick wall. It was perfect. The day I moved, I carried only a few boxes of my own things. My books, my clothes, my personal files, and the succulent. I placed it on the windowsill in my new living room. It looked small and a little lost in the empty space, but it had sunlight. The first night in my new apartment was the quietest night of my life. There were no echoes of Alex's footsteps, no phantom scent of his cologne. The silence wasn't empty, it was mine. I had a roof over my head. I had a lawyer who believed in me. I had a small, resilient plant. It wasn't an empire, but it was a start. Now I had to deal with my career. The leave of absence was a polite firing, and we both knew it. I couldn't go back. Henderson and Alex's father had made that clear. The firm was their territory. So I started looking for a new job. It was more brutal than I could have imagined. The legal community is small. Word travels fast. I'd get interviews, and they would go well, but then I'd get the polite rejection email a few days later. I knew Alex was behind it. He was poisoning the well, whispering in the right ears, framing me as unstable, a liability. He was making his prophecy come true, one closed door at a time. Doubt began to creep back in. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't good enough on my own. Maybe my entire career had been a product of his influence. I had one particularly painful interview at a mid-sized firm. The hiring partner, a man named Mr. Davies, looked at my resume with a condescending smile. "Impressive record," he said. "You and Alex made quite the team at Henderson and Croft." The way he said it, *team*, made it clear who he thought the star player was. "I'm proud of the work I did there," I said, keeping my voice even. He leaned back in his chair. "I hear you're going through a bit of a rough patch personally. We need people who are 100% focused here, Morgan. No distractions." It was a test. He was probing for the weakness Alex had told him was there. I looked him straight in the eye. "My personal life is my own, Mr. Davies. My professional focus has never wavered. My record speaks for itself." He gave me a non-committal hum and ended the interview shortly after. I never heard from them again. I walked out of that building and into the cold afternoon air, the humiliation burning in my cheeks. He was everywhere. His shadow loomed over my entire professional life. I went home to my small, quiet apartment and felt the despair start to circle again. I had enough money from the sale of my car to last another month, maybe two. After that, I didn't know. I was staring out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass when my phone rang. It was Anya. "Good news," she said, her voice crisp. "The judge granted our motion. Alex's assets are frozen pending the hearing. He is not pleased." A tiny spark of something warm ignited in my chest. A win. A small one, but a win. "He's been forced to submit his financial disclosures," Anya continued. "And I think you'll find them interesting. I'm sending them over now." A few minutes later, the email arrived. I opened the file, my heart pounding. It was a list of his accounts, his investments, his credit card statements. And there it was. A second credit card, one I never knew existed. The statements went back 2 years. Dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel rooms in cities he'd never mentioned visiting, jewelry purchases from stores I didn't recognize, and regular, monthly payments to a leasing office for an apartment in a trendy downtown neighborhood. The blonde from the photograph. It hadn't been a recent fling. It had been a whole other life. A life he was living while he was still coming home to me, still kissing me goodnight. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated, it took my breath away. He hadn't just left me. He had been betraying me for years, all while lecturing me about my supposed complacency. The anger returned, sharp and clear. It burned away the last vestiges of my doubt and self-pity. He hadn't left because I was weak. He had left because his double life was about to be exposed, and he needed to control the narrative first. He needed to discredit me before I could ever expose him. His words, "You'll never make it without me," asterisk echoed in my head, but they sounded different now. They weren't a prophecy. They were a threat from a desperate, guilty man. This was never about my competence. It was about his cowardice. That night, I updated my resume. I removed any language that framed my work as collaborative with Alex. I highlighted the cases I had led, the arguments I had crafted, the wins that were mine and mine alone. The next week, I had an interview with a small, highly respected litigation firm, Sterling and Cole. They were known for being scrappy, for taking on tough cases the big firms wouldn't touch. They were giant killers. The partner who interviewed me was a woman named Elizabeth Sterling. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of unshakable confidence. She didn't ask me about my divorce. She didn't mention Alex. She asked me about a specific appellate brief I had written 3 years prior. "The argument on contributory negligence in the Miller case," she said, tapping my resume. "That was a novel approach. Bold. I was surprised Henderson's firm had it in them. Was that yours?" My breath caught. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen my asterisk work. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "It was mine." She nodded slowly, a small, knowing smile on her face. "I thought so." She offered me a job on the spot. It paid less than my old firm, the hours were longer, and the office didn't have a view. I accepted without hesitation. The first day at Sterling and Cole was like learning to breathe a different kind of air. There was no old boys club, no whispered gossip. There was just the work. The focus was relentless. You were judged on the quality of your arguments, the depth of your research, and your willingness to fight for your client. I thrived. All the energy I had once poured into my marriage, into navigating the complex social politics of our old life, I now poured into my work. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I took on the cases no one else wanted, the complex, messy files that required thousands of hours of painstaking research. My little apartment became my sanctuary. I'd come home exhausted, and the quiet would welcome me. I'd water the succulent, which was now thriving, its leaves thick and green, sprouting new offshoots. I started cooking for myself again. Simple meals. I bought a small yoga mat and would stretch on the living room floor in the mornings, the sun streaming through the window. I was building a life. A small, quiet, fiercely independent life, all on my own. A year passed. The divorce proceedings dragged on. A slow, ugly war of attrition fought through legal documents and motions. Alex's lawyers tried to paint me as a bitter, vengeful woman seeking an unfair settlement. Anya countered every move with calm, factual evidence of his financial infidelity and professional sabotage. At work, I was given more and more responsibility. Elizabeth became a mentor, a tough but fair guide. She saw the hunger in me, the drive to prove myself, and she channeled it. She put me on the firm's biggest case, a complex class action lawsuit against a massive corporation. It was a career-defining case, the kind of legal battle that could drag on for years. The kind of case Alex always said I didn't have the stamina for. I lived and breathed that case. My desk disappeared under mountains of documents. My nights were filled with strategy sessions and witness prep. I was exhausted, but I had never felt more alive. I had a purpose that was entirely my own. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about 18 months after I'd started at the new firm, Elizabeth called me into her office. She closed the door, a rare occurrence. "Sit down, Morgan," she said, her expression serious. My stomach dropped. I thought I had made a mistake, missed a deadline, done something wrong on the class action case. She let the silence hang for a moment, then slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It was an internal memo. I picked it up and read the subject line. Announcement of new partner. Underneath it was my name. I stared at the paper, the black letters blurring. I read it again and then a third time. Partner, it didn't seem real. "We're a meritocracy here, Morgan," Elizabeth said softly. "You've done the work. You've earned the respect of every person in this firm. You've earned this." I looked up at her, my eyes stinging. I couldn't speak. All I could do was nod. I walked back to my office in a daze, the memo clutched in my hand. I sat down in my chair and looked out the window. The rain was still falling, but the gray city looked beautiful. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Anya. The subject line was simple: hearing date. I opened it. The final hearing for the divorce was scheduled. In 2 weeks. I looked from the email on my screen to the partner announcement in my hand. He said I'd be drowning in 6 months. He said I'd never make it without him. He thought he had left me with nothing, but he had been wrong. He hadn't left me with nothing. He had left me with a single, crucial thing I never had when I was with him. He had left me with myself. That's when I realized the hearing wasn't an ending I had to survive. It was a beginning I had already earned. The 2 weeks leading up to the hearing were the calmest I had been in almost 2 years. The partner announcement had settled something deep inside me. It was a tangible, irrefutable fact in a world that had been built on whispers and lies. It was an anchor. At work, nothing and everything had changed. My name was on the door, my voice carried a little more weight in meetings, but the work itself was the same. It was still the relentless, consuming challenge that had saved me. I threw myself into the class action case, leading late-night strategy sessions with my team. They were young, brilliant, and hungry. They looked at me with respect. Not because of who I was married to, but because of the arguments I built and the hours I put in beside them. One night, a junior associate named Ben looked up from a mountain of discovery documents, his eyes tired but bright. "I don't know how you do it, Morgan. Your focus is incredible." I just smiled. You learn to block out the noise. Alex had become noise. His threats, his predictions, his entire campaign to ruin me, it had all faded into background static. I was tuned to a different frequency now. My small apartment felt more like a home than the grand house ever had. It was filled with my books, my music, and the quiet rhythm of my own life. The succulent on the windowsill had become almost unrecognizable from the withered little thing I'd rescued from his desk. It had grown tall and strong, and a few weeks before the hearing, a tiny, delicate pink flower had bloomed at the end of a long stalk. I'd stood there staring at it, this impossible, unexpected bit of beauty. It felt like a sign. The night before the hearing, I didn't pace. I didn't agonize. I ordered takeout, drank a single glass of wine, and read over Anya's final brief. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard facts. I went to bed early and slept soundly. The morning of the hearing, I woke before my alarm. The sun was just beginning to streak the sky pink and gray. I did my usual yoga stretches on the small mat in my living room, feeling the pull in my muscles, the steadiness of my own breath. I chose my outfit with care, not a weapon, but a statement of self. A simple, well-tailored navy blue dress. It was elegant, professional, and entirely my own style. I put on the small pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. My only piece of jewelry. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself, not Alex's wife, not Henderson and Croft's dismissed associate, just Morgan, a partner at Sterling and Cole, a woman who had survived. Anya met me at the courthouse. She was wearing a sharp, dark gray suit, her expression as calm and focused as ever. She gave me a brief, reassuring nod. "Ready." "Yes," I said, and I was surprised by how true it was. We walked into the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd imagined, paneled in dark wood that seemed to absorb all the light. It smelled of floor polish and old paper. He was already there. Alex sat at the opposing table, next to his lawyer, a silver-haired man from a rival corporate firm. Alex looked impeccable in a dark, expensive suit, his tie a perfect knot. He looked confident, relaxed. He caught my eye as I sat down and gave me a small, condescending smirk. It was the same smirk I remembered from the day he left. The smirk of a man who believed he had already won. I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even a flicker of the old pain. I just looked back at him, my expression neutral, and then I turned my attention to Anya. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes. The proceedings began. Alex's lawyer, Mr. Davies, the same man who had interviewed me a year and a half ago, stood up to make his opening statement. His voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with false sincerity. He painted a picture of a loving, supportive husband who had been forced to make an impossible choice. He spoke of Alex's tireless dedication to his career, a career that had generously supported his wife's, less ambitious, professional path. My client provided Mrs. Evans with a lifestyle of comfort and opportunity, Davies droned on. He supported her, mentored her, and championed her career at Henderson and Croft. A career, I might add, that faltered the moment she was left to her own devices. He gestured vaguely in my direction. Sadly, since their separation, Mrs. Evans has been unable to maintain her professional standing. A leave of absence from her former firm, a string of failed interviews, it paints a clear picture of dependency. My client is not an unreasonable man. He is willing to offer a fair, even generous, settlement. But the demands being made by Mrs. Evans are disproportionate to her contributions, both to the marriage and to the marital assets, which were largely generated by my client's success. He sat down, looking pleased with himself. I glanced at Alex. He was watching me, his eyes cold and triumphant. He was waiting for me to flinch, to look away, to show any sign of the broken woman he believed me to be. I held his gaze for a single, steady moment. Then I turned back to the judge. Anya stood up. She didn't move to the center of the room. She remained by our table, her hands resting lightly on a thin file. "Your Honor," she began, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "The narrative Mr. Davies has just presented is compelling. It is also a work of fiction." Davies bristled, but Anya ignored him. "We will not waste the court's time debating the emotional complexities of a failed marriage. We will, however, present facts. Let's start with the marital assets Mr. Thorne so generously claims to have generated." She picked up a single document. "This is a credit card statement for an account Mr. Thorne held without my client's knowledge for the final 2 years of their marriage. On this statement, we see monthly rent payments for a downtown apartment my client has never set foot in. We see hotel stays in cities my client was told Mr. Thorne was visiting for business, alone. We see thousands of dollars in purchases from high-end jewelry and clothing stores, gifts not intended for his wife." She placed the document on the clerk's desk. "This was not a marriage that ended, Your Honor. It was a business partnership that one partner was secretly liquidating for years." Alex's face had gone rigid. His confident posture had tightened. He shot a furious look at Davies, who seemed momentarily flustered. Anya continued, her tone unchanged. "Next, let's address my client's career. Mr. Davies is correct that my client left her previous firm. What he failed to mention is that she was pressured into a leave of absence by a senior partner, a close personal friend of Mr. Thorne's father, after Mr. Thorne spent weeks telling colleagues that my client was unstable and unfocused." She paused, letting the words sink in. "It wasn't a failure to cope, Your Honor. It was a coordinated campaign of professional sabotage, designed to cripple my client's career and validate Mr. Thorne's belief that she could not succeed without him." Alex was now pale under his expensive tan. He was staring at Anya, his mouth a thin, hard line. The smirk was gone. Anya picked up another thin file from her desk. She didn't even open it. She just held it. "Mr. Thorne's assessment of my client's professional capabilities seems to be based on rather outdated information. He has gone to great lengths to paint a picture of a woman who is adrift, incompetent, and unable to find her footing in the legal world." She looked directly at Alex. For the first time, her voice held a faint, sharp edge of steel. "He is mistaken." She turned her attention back to the judge. The moment stretched, silent, and heavy. I could feel every eye in the room on us. My own heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. "Contrary to the claim that she cannot make it on her own," Anya said, her words clear and precise. "My client, Morgan Evans, was named a full partner at the litigation firm Sterling and Cole 2 weeks ago." Silence. It was absolute. The air in the room seemed to crackle. I watched Alex's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The shock came first, a widening of his eyes, then disbelief, his head shaking in a tiny, involuntary motion. And finally, the dawning, sickening understanding. His entire case, the foundation of his narrative, the very core of his power over me, had just been obliterated with a single sentence. He looked at me then, truly looked at me for the first time that day. He wasn't looking at his weak, dependent ex-wife. He was looking at a partner from a rival firm, an equal. No, not an equal. He had built his career on connections and inheritance. I had built mine from the ashes of the life he had burned down. I had surpassed him. The judge looked from Anya to me, a new light of interest in her eyes. She picked up a document, glanced at it, and then looked back at Alex's lawyer. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dry, Is there anything else? Or would you like a moment to confer with your client about this new information? Davies looked like he'd been slapped. He stammered something about being blindsided, about needing a recess. The judge granted it. As soon as she left the bench, Alex turned on his lawyer, his voice a furious, choked whisper. How did you not know this? How? I didn't stay to watch. Anya touched my arm, and we walked out into the hallway. The 15-minute recess felt like a lifetime. We didn't speak. We just sat on a hard wooden bench, the sounds of the courthouse echoing around us. I felt strangely calm, as if I were watching a movie of someone else's life. When we were called back in, the atmosphere had completely changed. The confidence and arrogance had evaporated from their side of the room. In its place was a desperate, scrambling energy. The rest of the hearing was a formality. Anya calmly presented the facts of our case. Davies offered weak rebuttals, his arguments now stripped of their central premise. Alex sat there, silent and gray-faced, a statue of impotent rage. He had built a prison of lies for me, but it turned out he was the one who was trapped inside it. The judge delivered her ruling that afternoon. She was methodical, her language precise. She spoke of Mr. Thorne's clear pattern of financial deceit and his lack of candor with the court. She awarded me a settlement that was far more than they had offered. It was a full half of all documented marital assets, plus a significant portion of the funds he had tried to hide. She also ordered him to pay all of my legal fees. It wasn't a punishment, it was a correction. A rebalancing of the scales he had worked so hard to tip in his favor. The gavel came down. It was over. Anya shook my hand, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. Congratulations, Morgan. You earned it. I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion. As I gathered my things, Alex approached me. His lawyer tried to stop him, but he brushed him off. He stood in front of me, his face a mask of fury and confusion. How, he hissed, his voice low. Sterling and Cole, they don't just make people partners. How did you do it? He still didn't understand. He thought it was a trick, a connection, a secret move on a chessboard he thought only he knew how to play. He couldn't comprehend the simple truth. I looked at him, at the man I had once loved, the man who had tried to destroy me, and I felt a profound, aching pity for him. He was so small. I worked for it, I said softly. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the courtroom, out of the courthouse, and into the bright afternoon sun. I didn't take a cab. I just started walking, with no particular destination in mind. The city was loud, chaotic, and beautiful. I felt the warmth of the sun on my face, a gentle breeze stirring my hair. I was free. His final words to me, the curse he had laid upon me, echoed in my mind one last time. You'll never make it without me. How wrong he was. He hadn't been the source of my strength. He had been the filter that diluted it. His presence in my life hadn't made me successful. It had kept me from realizing my own potential. The empire he'd wanted to build wasn't for us. It was for him, with me as a decorative accessory. His betrayal wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of my education. He taught me that kindness is not weakness. That trust must be earned, not given blindly. And that the quiet, steady work of building your own self-respect is the only foundation that can never be taken from you. He had wanted to erase me, to make me a footnote in his own grand story. But all he had done was hand me the pen. I stopped hating him somewhere on that long walk home. Hate was a heavy thing to carry, and my shoulders already felt so light. He was just a man, a deeply insecure man who had to tear others down to feel tall. His punishment wasn't the judge's ruling. It was the life he was doomed to live, always needing to prove his worth, always looking over his shoulder. My peace was in knowing I never had to do that again. When I finally arrived back at my apartment building, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. I let myself into my quiet, sunlit home. I walked over to the window and looked at the succulent. Its little pink flower was tilted toward the light, a small, vibrant testament to resilience. I reached out and gently touched one of its thick green leaves. It was firm and cool and very much alive. Respect can't be bought and it can't be stolen. It can only be built one quiet choice at a time. That's what I learned. I stopped waiting for his apology or the world's approval. Peace was mine to give myself. If this story reminded you that your own strength is the one thing no one can ever take from you, subscribe and join our community. More stories of quiet victories are waiting.